Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. Today we're talking about three things that are usually connected to one another but are actually completely different. The first is envy and jealousy. People constantly confuse envy and jealousy. And one of the sources of happiness is that a lot of times people imagine that if they have certain things, they're going to be happy. In contrast, they don't realize that happiness, there's more to happiness, or really the feeling of serenity is what people are looking for. The feeling of calmness and peacefulness in their heart and peace in their heart is actually more involved with removing certain things than adding. And rarely ever is adding something material what people need. All right, that's rarely what people need. What people need to remove are certain things that are emotional, you could say, or we would say maybe spiritual, but envy is the number one thing. And the removal of envy, first you have to know what it is in order to remove it. So if you don't have this book, this is one of the books that's really I recommend everyone to have in their library. It's the shortened version of Ihya Ulumuddin, Mukhtasar Ihya Ulumuddin. All right, if you don't have this book, I don't even know if this actual orange one is still in print. It's a very neat looking orange one, translated from the Arabic by Marwan Khalaf. Okay, and he takes all 40 books of the Ihya and summarizes it into this little book right here. Okay, and Imam al-Ghazali himself is the one who abridged his own book. Imam al-Ghazali abridged it, and then Marwan translated it. So envy, number one, you have to know, is the sin or the wrong action, because it's the sin of the heart. Allah says, be careful of the outward sin and the inward sin. Okay, and as we begin, I want to first welcome the group from Masjid Bilal, who is going to be sharing this stream. All right, so any questions that they have, inshallah, feel free to put it up right away. But the point is that what we're saying is that Sayyidina Ali said that the sin of the heart, of envy, is its own punishment. He said there can't be something worse, a worse punishment on this earth than to have this sin. So it's a sin that is its own punishment. That's envy. All right. So it's a sin that is its own punishment, because the one who's envying, number one, Al-Ghazali tells us, Sayyidina Ali said it, he's miserable in this life. Okay. And number two, he ruins his future, because the one who envies, he spends his time looking and hating and thinking about someone else. Whereas in order to actually do actions, you have to actually be not thinking about anyone else except your own self, right? You got to be thinking about your own self in order to do anything. So the envious person is, number one, batal, like he's useless, because he's constantly thinking about others. Thinking about others is going to drain you from doing your own thing. So this is the first thing, that if you love yourself, you remove envy from your heart. Forget righteousness, forget goodness. If you love to feel good, you remove envy from your heart. Because the first source of misery is your own self and the feeling of envy inside your own self. The second source of misery is being a failure. You're not going to succeed when you're thinking about others. Okay? So he says now, the actual definition of envy is that someone hates to see the blessing of Allah bestowed upon his brother. So in other words, when you see that someone has some ni'mah, has some good that you hate, it's something inside you gets triggered and you hate it. You hate to see the good come on someone else. All right, it bothers you that someone else is glistening and shiny and has everything good. All right, so that bothers you. So you have to detect that. And the first step, if people want to talk about being good or spiritual, what have you, the first step is to remove this from the heart. And now, well, where does that come from? Envy itself is not the root sickness. Many people think envy is the root sickness. It's not. Envy, well, look, you don't envy snails who are really, living really well. You don't envy jaguars. Why? Because you don't care about their life. You don't care what they have. You don't envy birds. You only envy other humans. Why? Because you love dunya. Okay? You love their dunya. All right? So humans, you only envy that which you love. All right? You only envy something if you wish to have it yourself. And that's why Al-Ghazali says that the exposition on envy has to be connected to the exposition on deprecation of dunya. Right? Hubb dunya, love of dunya. And here we have to define dunya now too. So love of dunya is actually the root of envy, right? Envy is not its own sickness by itself. Rather, love of dunya is the root sickness. So what here is dunya? Dunya is described as everything that takes a person away from the remembrance of Allah. Okay? That's the actual definition of dunya. All right? Everything that takes a person away from the actual remembrance of Allah, from the remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jal, be it even if it is a virtue. Okay? In that respect, if it's taking you away. So what are the imams' virtue? Envy. Ulama, for example, they envy the writings of each other, the followers of each other, right? They envy that. They envy knowledge. They envy high asanid versus low asanid, right? That's what they envy. So every group is going to have something different that they envy. Okay? The ubad, they envy the karamat, right? Well, a real abid, a real awliya, they've purified themselves from this envy in the first place. But everyone envies something different. If you go to Wall Street, okay, $20 billion, you're a second-class citizen, right? If you had $20 billion and you went to one of these banks and said, I want you guys to invest, let's say Goldman or Deutsche Bank or one of these banks, and you ask to invest $20 million, they hang up the phone, right? It's nothing. These people are dealing with institutional wealth that is hovering around the billion. Now we're talking. Right? Once you start hitting 500 million, 700 million, now you're worth our time. All right? The trader will now pick up the phone. So in every world, right? In every zone, there's a different thing that people envy, right? So dunya does not have any one definition, except that it is everything that distracts a person from the remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jal. And anything that triggers a person's envy, you consider that your dunya. If you envy it, it's your dunya. So for me, the concept of how much money you have, it was never something that I ever would have thought of. Who cares, right? But rather who you studied with, or how high your asanid are, and how many years you sat with so-and-so, that's something people envy. And there is some good to that, which we're going to cover, right? But the concept of how much money you have, no one cares about that, right? In the world that we know. But in some worlds, that's what they care about. So in every sphere, there's something different that people envy. And that's why you have to know that the definition of dunya is very fluid, and it could change. And everyone's got to define the dunya for themselves. So what is it that you envy? That's really what you consider dunya. That's what's distracting you from Allah Azza wa Jal. The only way to cure yourself from love of dunya is to constantly almost brainwash yourself and tell yourself constantly that you will never have it. Right? To constantly make yourself imagine a world where you'll never have it. And that's why what is the sign that dunya is leaving the heart? It is that when you start despairing from ever having what you want. Right? So al-yas, when you despair from having what you want, that's the sign that dunya is khalas, coming out of the heart. So people desire fame, they desire women, they desire rich husbands, they desire handsome husbands, physically fit husbands, they do all these things that they're desiring, cars, right? Homes, right? Beautiful children, right? Daughters that are beautiful, sons that are successful, whatever people are envying, or companies, right? These people who have companies, they compete in companies, right? It's like a sport, it's like a game. The politicians have their own envy. So once they've told themselves, convinced themselves that it's gone, all right? At that point, though, here's the thing. Ash-Shafi'i said, you can have something provided that you've already convinced yourself that if you don't have it, you'll still be happy, right? That if you don't have it, you'll still be perfectly fine and perfectly happy, all right? If you're perfectly fine without it, then you could have it, all right? So Ash-Shafi'i says the sign that something is no longer dunya for you is that if someone takes it away from you, your heart doesn't skip a beat. This is the sign that something is not dunya. So it is true that there can be people out there who have a lot, but they have no dunya. There's no love of dunya inside them. Right? There's no love of dunya inside them. I don't know what this dog's going on. As long as he stays on his side of the fence, there's no problem. The neighbor had a dog. The dog passed away. This neighbor has been barking at me for 4 years. That neighbor's dog, because he had never got close enough to me to sniff me and to know my scent. I've been coming home for 4 years. He's been barking at me, but sadly, the other day he died. So the other dog is pretty lonely. They used to bark at each other and talk to each other, but the other dog is lonely. In any event, so when he hears me now talking, he's barking at me now because the other dog got bored since his friend died. In any event, so how a person knows that something to them is not dunya, then ask yourself, all right, if you lost it, is it a problem? Now here's something else. There's something even more. Ask yourself, if your worst rival got it and you didn't, would you get envious? Right? Would you move on the inside? Because a lot of people don't have a problem with not having anything, but they do have a problem with their enemies having it, right? And everyone's got some rival out there. Everyone's got someone that they got, some maybe lesser than others, but like less harsh than others. But everyone's got someone that they butt heads with, they don't get along with. That's normal and natural, okay? But you have to ask yourself, if what I wanted was given to my enemy and rival, would I then have that same feeling of peace? Will I be at peace, right? Or will I be able? And for a mu'min, we never stop having these problems, right? And never stop having these sickness on the inside of the heart and the sins on the outside of the heart. And our message is for those people struggling with the sins of the outward or the inward, is that this life is a constant struggle. This deen, there's no left lane on the deen. Whenever you see someone who thinks that they found the left lane of the deen where they're going to achieve, right, something, quickly, they're fools. You should know that they're going to crash and burn, right? They're probably actually setting themselves back. Just the thought and the idea and the imagination that there's a left lane in this deen is one of the most naive things in the world, and you're probably just setting yourself back a couple of maybe a decade, right? When you imagine yourself that there's a fast lane in the deen. This deen is one of those lifetime affairs, and Allah Azza wa Jal has shown us over and over and over, this deen is a lifetime affair. It's decade after decade after decade. So you don't worry, there is no left lane, there's no group of people out there. If there's any one group of people who would actually be able to surpass more than anyone else, it's people who study. That's the only thing I can think of that's textually that Allah has told us, that in terms of khushu'ah, khashya, fear of Allah, that they will surpass others, is studying, right? And studying is something that no one's ever going to do forever, right? There's always a time where you can do it full time for a while, or you could do a lot and then life hits you and then you slow down. Everyone slows down. So even that, all right, you can catch up if you're plugging in an hour a day or 30 minutes a day or even 2 hours a week, right? You will learn. You'll eventually learn as long as someone's plodding away and plugging away. You'll learn. So the door of knowledge is open. And with the internet even, and I don't believe in solely relying on the internet. You have to actually meet scholars, but everything has come to you. It's just about discipline. And these machines, the problem with these machines, they do make everything so much easier. But anytime I found myself trying to get a software to make something that I'm doing easier, I found that 3 hours go by comparing softwares, trying new softwares. Well, to get this software, you actually need this plugin. And then it actually tells, well, if you're trying to do this, forget that software, you actually need to do this. And 3 hours go by because there's so many options, right? That honestly, if I had a pen and paper, I would have wrote more, right, than trying to find a shortcut through the internet. So I actually have a little specialty of mine, and I got broken computers, which is web broken. So I got a web broken computer, and I do achieve so much more on it's a computer with no internet. So if I'm studying something, writing something, even reading PDFs, right? When you're disconnected, you can do so much more. This whole connection thing is such a mirage, right? Because yeah, you're connecting you to the thing that you need and 3 billion other things that you don't need that waste your time. And anyway, that's a divergent. So the idea of dunya is that which you don't mind losing and you don't mind your enemy having it either at the same time. There was a US president who said, he was running for office. He said, I actually don't want to be president, but I can't stand the idea of my enemies being president. All right, so his enemy and him and his arch rival were running against. So that's dunya. And all this is envy and how to get rid of envy. Now there's something called good envy, right? And envy, it's synonymous in this sense. Because in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ used the word envy in the hadith. He said, "La hasada illa fitnatain." And the ulama, so that they don't confuse it, they gave it the word ghibta. And the word ghibta means that you don't dislike, you're not upset, you have no anger toward or any ill will towards someone with the ni'mah that has a blessing, but you do have a desire for it for yourself, right? And in this there's a tafsil. A tafsil is a separation. The tafsil being that if the issue is that you want it for yourself and it is a good thing, then it's good. And the Prophet ﷺ pointed to two things here, and he said knowledge and sadaqah. And from this knowledge and sadaqah fall, in other words, they're symbolic for everything good. All right, everything good, seen and unseen. Like fasting, like chastity, like someone who has access to pure food, someone who has ability to lower their gaze, someone who has manners. All of these, you should, when you see it, you should desire it for yourself. There's no zuhud in righteousness. So Imam al-Haddad even talks about false zuhud, and he says some people say that they have zuhud but in righteousness. So alhamdulillah, they have tahajjud, well, let them have tahajjud and I'll give sadaqah. No, it shouldn't be like that. Rather, every time you see the good for someone, you should ask for it for yourself. You ask, may Allah give them thabat in it and grant it to me as well, right? So you shouldn't see someone making hajj and say, alhamdulillah, let them have it, right? No, in dunya you could say, oh, they're rich, let them be rich, alhamdulillah, they can have it, I don't need it, right? But for the good, right, you don't do that. So that's the first thing. That's ghibta. Now ghibta becomes not sinful, but it becomes inappropriate or blameworthy if it's something of what is basically the halal, right? So they're rich, so alhamdulillah, I'm happy for you, I want you to be rich, but I need to be rich too just because you're rich. So this is not considered like sinful. This is not something that destroys the heart, but it is something that is inappropriate for a mu'min to be chasing dunya. And every time you see that someone has dunya, you're going to go get it, right? Every time, okay, they reseeded their lawn, so we're going to reseed our lawn. Well, the lawn is perfectly fine. Yeah, but theirs is like 3 shades greener than ours, so we're going to redo our lawn. They went and got themselves a luxury SUV. Well, we're doing fine with our SUV, but no, we got to get ourselves a luxury so that they don't have a luxury that we don't have, right? They redo the siding of their house. All right, we got to redo the same thing. So this type of thing is inappropriate. Okay, it is appropriate if it has a functional value benefit. So if everyone in the neighborhood is doing something, your actual house property is going to go down if you don't do the same thing. So you end up having to do it, right? You have to do it. And by the way, there's some material dunya that certain professions require you having, and other professions sort of it's inappropriate to have. For example, if you're a surgeon, if you're a brain surgeon, and let's say hypothetically I'm going in for a brain surgery and I'm going to see the doctor and I need to see his opinion and check him out, and I go in and this guy pulls up in a rickety old beat up Honda, right? You know what I'm doing? I'm reversing out and finding another doctor, because you need a doctor who's successful. And that's why all the doctors, they got their Teslas and Mercedes, and they have to have that. Think about it. Just think about it. You're going in for heart surgery, for brain surgery. You come in on the doctor and he pulls in some beat up thing. Well, listen, if you're such a good doctor, why aren't you rich, right? So he needs to have that. Likewise, lawyers, real estate agents, okay, they all, and some of them, you can even, it's tax deductible. It's part of the expense, okay? All these Wall Street guys, which, I mean, half of that stuff is all, not even half, 70-80% of that stuff is all betting, and it's all qimar, and it's all sinful from that element and from that aspect to begin with, okay? But these guys, I mean, your value is what you're investing, okay? So if you're going in and dealing with these business types, you better go in with a $3,000 suit at minimum, right? At minimum, okay? And maybe forget driving in, you need a chauffeur. So certain jobs, and you have to understand this, require certain material images, certain material uh, uh, standards that you have to keep. Now, other jobs are the opposite. Any intellectual job, it's just not fitting, right? And you should be in the middle, neither too poor that people will think that, all right, you're probably going to ask me for money eventually, or too rich that you're distracted. How are you thinking about ideas in the realm of ideas if you're, that rich, right? So there's got to be a middle, and you'll tend to find anyone who's in any cerebral intellectual subject, like professors, they have their Subarus and their Volkswagens and maybe the Audis, right? But they tend to live a different lifestyle because it's expected for them to be in the realm of ideas, right? Rather than the realm of other things, right? Now, charity work, there's a whole debate on these charity people, how much they should be making. Like these charity managers of charities, there's always a big debate on should they be rich, should they not be? Well, why is this guy flying first class? Why is he making this salary? My money's going to charity, and he's taking it, right, for his salary. So there's all sorts of debates on that. And by the way, in most cases, the guys who make a ton of money in charity as CEOs of charities, they also actually bring in a lot of money. So they make a smaller percentage than a lot of other people, but they rake in so much money because they're so good at what they do. So anyway, that's what we call ghibta, and it's good if it is a matter of deen or righteousness. I'm wondering how long this guy's going to weed whack in here. I waited till he finished, and now he started up again. All right, you can start putting in your comments or questions because we're about to cover the last thing here, which is more something to do with the English language than anything else. And that has to do with jealousy. Jealousy is not envy. Jealousy has nothing to do with envy. Jealousy is something that basically doesn't exist in the English language, what we have. And it is ghira, right? Ghira. Jealousy, and we translate it as ghira. And ghira is that you love a thing so much, all right? You love something so much that you can't stand the idea of anyone misusing it. And we Muslims have to have ghira for our deen, and we have to have ghira for the opposite genders in our families, and in general for the Muslims. These are the three things that a Muslim has ghira about. So you love your deen, you can't stand anyone, right, misusing it. All right, and so ghira, the Prophet ﷺ said, when ghira comes upon a person, sometimes they act out so rashly, right? And the Prophet was always forgiving when a woman acted with ghira, right? And Sayyidah Aisha, Sayyidah Hafsa, when they acted with ghira for the Prophet ﷺ, and they were so angry that anyone else was giving him attention, right? Any of the other women. So he always forgave it. He always forgave that. One time Sayyidah Aisha came in, and she saw it was her day. Prophet was in her house. He had guests. She saw that one of the other mothers of the believers had brought him food. And she's thinking, this is my day, right? So she walks in, right in the middle of the men and women, or of the guests. And then as she's walking out, accidentally flips over the plate of food, right? She flipped it over. So they got covered with dirt. They fell on the ground and covered with dirt. So the Prophet ﷺ just laughed, and he said, Gharat ummukum. And many, many other times, they had ghira, and the Prophet never blamed them for that, because ghira is a good thing, okay? Jealousy in the West is considered a bad thing. Well, that's why their families are all destroyed. It's actually a good thing. That a man, for example, what kind of man would allow some stranger in adolescence to take out his daughter for 16, 17 years? You're raising, and this daughter's living in your house, and some pimply kid is coming to take her out, and they're going to come back at 2 in the morning, right? What? And in the movies, if you notice, they always want to make it look like the dad is a fool, right? And that this 17-year-old kid, he always gets away with it, and after all these years, all of a sudden, this girl gets to drive away with some stranger, right? I mean, it's absolutely destructive to remove ghira from families and remove ghira from the deen of Muslims. And whenever some heretical group comes out and you just flip out because of what they're saying, they say, oh, you can't have a discussion and you just have to calm down, etc., right? And they want to make you look, right, like you're not a professional, you're not calm, you're not academic because you have some ghira for your deen, when they're bringing you something so contrary to what everyone knows to be true. So that's ghira for the opposite gender in your family. For your deen, number one, before that. And number three is for the Muslims at large, right? A Muslim, for example, we have the Sahabi, who when a non-believer in Medina pinned down the garment of a Muslim woman. He didn't know this Muslim woman. It wasn't his relative or family. And she moved and she became naked, right? Like her body was showing, her hair was showing, and everything was showing. So he got up and fought him, and he actually killed him. And then they killed him, right? That guy's friends killed the Muslim, right? And a war almost broke out. That Jewish tribe went out, gathered their troops against the Prophet ﷺ, right? And the Prophet, he beat them to it, right? And then they were expelled for raising up weapons, all right, against the Prophet, against the Muslims. Like, it's a rebellion, basically. So that is ghira for the general Muslim, for the Muslim, right? Whether males or females, that type of ghira, and that should exist. So be careful that they're trying to actually remove your manhood, remove everything good about you by removing ghira, all right, from within us. And that's something that it's only related to this subject of envy because of the linguistic confusion between envy and jealousy, right? Envy and jealousy. And Allah Azza wa Jal, He says He has ghira Himself, right? And what is it for? That is, believers do what is prohibited. He becomes full of ghira. Why? Because He wants the believers to be pure. He wants them pure, and He wants to be able to give them, right, from His reward, right? And He wants their heart to be for Him. So when He sees their heart leaning towards what is bad, right, he becomes angered and wrathful for that. All right, so let's take your comments and questions. Can you please mention the name of the text? The text is Mukhtasar. I'll show it again here. The Mukhtasar of Ihya Ulum ad-Din. All right, the Imam al-Ghazali's own abridgment of the Ihya Ulum ad-Din. That's what it is. All right, again, for those joining from the Masjid Bilal in Toms River, please send in your questions, and inshallah, if I don't get to them in the live stream, I'll get to them written later on. Fawaz Ahmed says, isn't ghira honor? Yeah, it's honor. It's something that I value, and I'm not going to let someone else degrade something that we value. The question is, what does the title of the book mean in English? It means the revival. Mukhtasar is the abridgment, and Ihya is the revivification or the revival, and Ulum ad-Din is the knowledges of the Deen. Joshua Perez says, that explains what I feel when I hear these new atheists like Sam Harris speak about Islam. Drives me crazy. And they're actually, I guarantee you, have never picked up a book on Islam, yet they are able to philosophize about it. And in any other time a theologian speaks on a subject, they try to retort back and say, listen, stay in your lane. But clearly they feel the right to pontificate on subjects that they've never studied. Why was Iblis envious of Adam? Was it arrogance or envy? Iblis was obsessed with the idea that he was of the highest station of the created beings in nearness to Allah Azza wa Jal. And that was his station. He was from the highest of the created beings, right? And when he was told that there will be a creation more beloved to Allah than you, then he went into a rage. So his obsession was really about his presence in the sight of Allah. His love of Allah was really his love of himself. He imagined it to be love of Allah, but it was love of himself, of having a high station with Allah. And if you truly love someone, then you love what that one loves, right? So if he truly, his belief and his love was solely for Allah Azza wa Jal, then at that point, what he should have done is say, look, if that's what Allah loves, then I love it too. Yeah, in Pakistan, they actually do care about theology. Yeah, in Pakistan, they care about theology, and that's because the Brailvi groups in Pakistan, they are serious about theology and guarding their theology. And they might not be like to be called their Brailvi groups. I'm not saying it in a bad way. It's a good thing. But they are, I guess you could really say, really serious about Aqidah, and they've really guarded Sunni Aqidah very well. All right, probably them and the Syrians more than anyone else in the Ummah. All right, what else we got? Let me just refresh this thing. Alright, if there are no other comments, we'll go once and twice, and then we'll wrap up. But we can always get to the questions later on, so don't worry about that. But for now, we'll wrap up if there aren't any other Q&As. Alright, yeah, I know that this wasn't the best time because people want to do this after Maghrib. The problem is with after Maghrib is that I just got office hours and other obligations in the evenings, but we'll try to find a way to do it in the evenings. But for now, we got to do this in the afternoon, and people can catch up. We'll post it, people can catch up, and we can get to the, if there are any discussions or Q&As afterwards. So for now, Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wal asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu s-salihati wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaykum.